Build skills with experts anytime, anywhere. Get certified, get ahead. The world's largest selection of courses, affordable online courses and learning opportunities.
So important. I think there's a lot of confusion that exists about PMI ACP certification in the project management community. Some people may think that getting PMI ACP certification is a matter of just buying an exam prep book or taking an exam prep training course and going out and taking the exam. Some people may think that once you've taken and passed the exam, that is your ticket to get a job working in an Agile environment as a project manager. Both of those assumptions are far from reality in my opinion, and this course will help you understand these misconceptions and develop a strategy to go beyond simply passing the PMI ACP exam and prepare yourself for a very high-impact, real-world Agile project management role. The confusion that exists in this area has only been exacerbated by the rapid growth of Agile. Although the exact numbers from various surveys are open to discussion, there's no question that Agile has become the latest management trend of today and is much more than just a fad. It is really here to stay, and the rate of adoption of Agile methodologies has increased significantly since 2009. A Forrester study from 2009 observed that 35% of organizations used Agile. By 2013, a study by Actuation Consulting showed that the adoption rate of Agile had grown to over 70%, which was much more than double what was observed in the 2009 survey. The rapid growth and proliferation of Agile methodologies has really added to the confusion that has already existed in this area. Another reason this training is so important is that, like many new things, Agile is becoming a hot new buzzword, and everyone wants to jump on the Agile bandwagon without necessarily fully understanding why they're getting into it and exactly what they expect to get out of it. An important point is, just becoming Agile is not necessarily the most important goal in itself, depending on the nature of the business you're in. It reminds me a lot of when Six Sigma was hot in the 1990s and early 2000s. For those of you who aren't familiar with Six Sigma was a quality control program developed in 1986 by Motorola. Initially, it emphasized cycle time improvement and reducing manufacturing defects to a level of no more than one defect in 3.4 million products. However, Six Sigma grew very rapidly from there and has evolved into a much more general business management philosophy focused on meeting customer requirements, improving customer retention, and improving and sustaining business products and services. In those days, Six Sigma was what we called the programme du jour. There was a lot of hype about it, and everyone wanted to jump on the Six Sigma bandwagon. Several patterns were apparent at that time. There was a lot of hoopla, like green belts and black belts, associated with Six Sigma. A lot of people got lost in the mechanics of doing Six Sigma. People tended to think that Six Sigma was a panacea for any possible problem that a business could have, and they tended to regard all other previous process improvement methodologies as obsolete and passé. A similar thing is happening with Agile today. While Agile has huge potential advantages for a business, I think it's important not to get lost in some of the hype that exists about Agile and objectively understand the differences between an Agile approach and a traditional project management approach, and the benefits and limitations of each. Agile will have a major impact on the project management profession. Today, Agile and traditional project management approaches are essentially two entirely different approaches without much integration, and some people even view them as inconsistent with each other. Over some period of time, Agile will transform what we know of today as project management into a much broader notion of project management that fully embraces Agile as well as traditional plan-driven approaches to project management. It raises the bar for project managers significantly. The image of what a project manager is needs to change dramatically. The role that a project manager plays will change significantly in many industries and application areas, and project managers need to go through a significant transformation to fill these new roles. This training will help you understand the impact of Agile on the project management profession and adapt your career as necessary to take advantage of the new opportunities it presents. In this section, I want to give you an overview of the course. However, before we get too far into how this particular course is organized, I want to step back and talk about how the overall PMI ACP learning path is designed, since this course is not really intended as a standalone course and is just the first course in the overall learning path. Let's talk about the general strategy behind the design of the overall PMI ACP learning path, of which this course is a part. When we set out to design the learning path and the specific courses that are included in it, we made a conscious decision that we didn't want it to be just a standard exam prep course for a couple of important reasons. First, I think there's already a number of courses out there that are designed as exam prep courses, and there's limited value in preparing someone to pass the PMI ACP exam if it doesn't also position them to do something in the real world with that knowledge when they're finished. It's important to recognize that the PMI ACP exam is not designed around a specific real-world role. It is primarily designed as a test of general Agile knowledge and skills. As a result, preparing for the exam doesn't really prepare you for a specific real-world role at all. We believe that developing a course that goes beyond simply preparing you to take the exam and really helps you prepare to put that knowledge and skills to use has a lot more value. In addition to the value of helping you prepare for a real-world role, putting the information in a real-world context will also help make the information much more meaningful and easier to retain. However, a big challenge we face in designing this course around a real-world role is that the role of an Agile project manager is not well defined at this time, and it is even somewhat controversial in some circles. In order to help you do something in the real world with the knowledge and skills you develop from this learning path, we need to better define the potential real-world roles that an Agile project manager might play so that you'll have a better idea of what target you're shooting at. Agile is changing the very nature of project management. You typically won't find anyone with the title of project manager at the team level in an Agile project, but there's a lot of project management going on. This slide shows an outline of the first half of the overall learning path that this course is part of and how it's organized. The first half of the learning path is heavily focused around learning Agile development practices, which includes this initial course, which is an introduction to Agile project management and the PMI ACP exam, Agile methodologies, adaptive planning practices, value-driven delivery and Agile requirements, Agile estimation and risk management, Agile communication practices and Agile tools, and finally, Agile development quality and testing practices. The second half of the course is more heavily focused on more advanced topics and preparing for the PMI ACP exam, which includes Agile team dynamics and performance and Agile leadership, continuous improvement, value stream analysis and product detection and resolution, hybrid Agile processes, Agile contracts and scaling Agile to an enterprise level, Agile metrics and student case study, and finally, the course summary and preparing for the PMI ACP exam. As I've mentioned, the overall learning path is organized primarily around a logical method of how you would go about putting these skills into practice from a real-world Agile project management perspective. Then in the final course in the learning path, we will come back and pull it all together and go over what you need to do to prepare for the PMI ACP certification exam. Now let's talk about how this particular course in the overall learning path is organized. This course is the initial course in the overall learning path and provides an introduction to Agile project management and the PMI ACP exam. The material in this course is a foundation for the rest of the learning path. This slide shows a summary of the modules that make up this particular course. As you can see, there are 7 modules in this course. This initial module in the course provides an introduction to the course and an overview of the process for becoming an Agile project manager and achieving PMI ACP certification. The remaining modules in this course focus on what are the career paths for an Agile project manager, the requirements for PMI ACP certification and an overview of the PMI ACP exam, understanding how Agile came about and why it makes sense, understanding Agile at a deeper level, the roots of Agile, understanding Agile at a deeper level from Agile values and principles, and developing an Agile mindset. Those topics should give you a good foundation for understanding Agile before we go on to more specific Agile methodologies in the following course. Let's first talk about what Agile project management is, because that subject can be somewhat controversial, and the role of an Agile project manager is not well defined at this time. There has been a lot of polarization that has existed between the project management community and the Agile community for a number of years, and there have been some strong opinions on each side of this fence. I can remember sitting in on a presentation some years ago by a very well-known Agile author and consultant, where she made the statement that the term Agile project management is an oxymoron. Many people have the opinion that Agile and traditional plan-driven project management principles and practices are mutually exclusive of each other and may even be in conflict with each other. To add to the confusion that exists, Agile and traditional project management principles and practices have been treated as separate and independent domains of knowledge with little or no integration between the two for a long time. It's no wonder that project managers are confused by all of this. To understand how this situation came about, we need to first understand how project management has evolved to date. The emphasis to date has been heavily on planning, organizing, and controlling the workflow associated with large, complex projects to make those efforts more reliable and predictable. As an example, in the 1950s and 1960s, there were some very large government programs like the Polaris missile program and the Apollo program to put astronauts on the moon that created some very demanding challenges for project managers to accurately plan, organize, and manage large, complex projects and programs. As a result, the critical path method, or CPM, and the program or project evaluation and review technique, or PERT, and other techniques were invented to deal with the challenge of organizing large, complex programs. And finally, PMI was founded in 1969. The emphasis was on control and predictability. A project was considered a failure if it didn't meet the cost and schedule commitments for the project. That mode of project management has essentially defined what project management is for many people to this day. The important point to get from this is that the notion of what project management is has been heavily associated with planning, structuring, and control of large, complex projects, and the roots of how we do project management today go back to the 1950s and 1960s or even earlier, and haven't changed significantly since that time. The big question is, what's next? And why is adopting a broader view of what project management is so important? I think there are several strong forces that will force the project management profession to go through some significant changes. As you can see from the history on the earlier slide, the emphasis to date has been clearly on planning and organizing of projects. That works fine in some environments where it is feasible to develop a detailed plan for a project up front. However, we're in a different world today. The pace of adopting new technology has increased at an incredible rate. This slide only shows the increase in the adoption rate of new technology through the initial evolution of the Internet, but you can bet that it hasn't slowed down since then. Think of all the advancements that have been made in smartphones, for example. The rate of technology change is severely straining traditional plan-driven project management approaches and calling for new and more adaptive approaches. Think of Apple and the iPhone and iPad development effort. Would that kind of radical technology breakthrough have been possible using a totally plan-driven project management approach? I don't think so. The important point is that the pace of new technology has increased dramatically and calls for a new project management approach. There has been a pendulum effect in this area for a number of years. Agile started out as somewhat of a revolution by developers against project management controls associated with traditional plan-driven project management approaches, or what is sometimes commonly called waterfall, that were perceived to be very cumbersome and bureaucratic. There is certainly some truth in that, but in some cases the pendulum has swung a little too far to the other extreme, to the extent that some people in the Agile community feel that imposing any kind of management controls on an Agile project is inconsistent with an Agile development approach. That is what has led to a lot of the polarization that exists today between the Agile community and the project management community. Over the past few years, as Agile has matured, however, that pendulum has started to swing back towards the middle of those extremes, and many people have begun to recognize that it's not a binary either-or decision to be Agile or Waterfall, and it's possible to create a hybrid approach that offers the right balance of a plan-driven approach and an adaptive approach to fit a given situation. This presents a significant challenge for the project management profession. At one time, if you had a PMP, you were recognized as a very well-qualified project manager. Over the past few years, however, PMI has recognized the need for project managers to have at least some awareness of Agile and Lean and created the Agile Certified Practitioner certification. That's definitely a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough in my opinion. The real challenge is learning how to blend Agile and traditional project management principles and practices in the right proportions to fit a given situation. That's exactly the challenge these courses in this learning path are designed to address. The courses in this learning path are not only excellent preparation for the PMI ACP exam, but they also go well beyond that and help project managers learn how to put that knowledge into practice in a real-world Agile project management situation. In my book, I use the analogy of a project manager as a cook versus a project manager as a chef, which I think illustrates the challenge for project managers very well. A cook knows how to prepare a limited number of simple recipes by the book. A chef knows how to prepare a much broader range of more exotic recipes. His or her knowledge is not limited to predefined recipes, and he or she will often create new and innovative recipes for a given situation. That's a challenge for project managers today, to become chefs rather than cooks, and that's a challenge this course is designed to help you address. That means that an Agile project manager understands a much broader range of methodologies, both Agile and traditional plan-driven approaches, and also understands those methodologies at a deeper level to know how to blend them together to fit a given situation. That doesn't mean that traditional plan-driven project management is obsolete and no longer useful, but in the not-too-distant future, a project manager who only knows how to do plan-driven project management will be like a carpenter who only knows how to use a hammer in many industries and application areas. In this course, we're going to try to help you understand the impact of Agile on the project management profession and how you can reshape your career direction as needed to take advantage of some of the new opportunities in this area. In summary, let me be clear about what I think an Agile project manager is. An Agile project manager is not someone who only knows how to practice Agile. That wouldn't make any sense. An Agile project manager must understand both traditional plan-driven project management and Agile principles and practices, and know how to blend them together in the right proportions to fit a given situation. The key is to fit the right approach to the project rather than force-fitting a project to a single approach, whatever it might be, Agile or not. In the next section of this course, we're going to start a new module on what are the career paths for an Agile project manager. Potential career paths for an Agile project manager. There are a couple of very key reasons why this is important. As I've mentioned, the role of an Agile project manager is not well defined, and the PMI ACP certification isn't really designed around qualifying someone for a particular role. It's just a test of general knowledge of Agile and Lean, so you really need to develop a clear idea for yourself of what you're going to do with it. Developing that kind of vision for yourself will be very valuable because it will allow you to target your efforts towards PMI ACP certification around a particular real-world role, and that will make the knowledge you learn for achieving PMI ACP certification a lot more meaningful and easier to retain. We're going to discuss 4 potential roles. The first is a team-level role. The role for a project manager at the team level in a typical Agile project is very limited. However, a project manager who has strong Agile skills can provide a lot of value added even in this environment. The second role is a hybrid Agile project role. For a lot of reasons that we will discuss, many companies need to integrate some level of conventional project management with Agile to create a hybrid project management approach. In these environments, there's a very strong need for an Agile project manager. The third role is an enterprise-level role. There is a much more significant role for an Agile project manager at the enterprise level as the projects grow in scope and complexity, and integration with the business environment becomes very critical. And the final role is taking an adaptive approach for non-Agile projects. Even if you never work in a pure Agile environment, learning the Agile principles and practices will make someone a much stronger project manager by developing a more adaptive approach that expands your project management repertoire of skills. Before we talk about these specific roles, it's important to recognize that there are at least two very different kinds of environments that have a big impact on the way an Agile process might be integrated into the company's business, and that will have a big impact on any potential Agile project management role. In companies that are in the business of developing products for external sale, such as Intuit, which makes Quicken, TurboTax, and QuickBooks, or service-oriented companies like Amazon.com, where technology plays a big role in driving their business, there's a strong and natural alignment between an Agile development process and the primary success factors that drive their business. And that makes it very easy to implement an Agile development process without too much additional management. In companies where that is not the case, the relationship of an Agile development process to the primary success factors that drive the business may be much more indirect, and it is much more difficult to implement an Agile development process. Because of the different financial models and metrics that are typically found in this kind of company, there is more of a need for integrating project management with the way they manage their business. A key difference is in how the company does financial management. In a product-oriented company, a given budget is typically allocated for ongoing development and support of the product. A team is dedicated to the product, and a product manager is typically given responsibility for planning that development effort. That is exactly what an Agile development approach does. In any other kind of company, the decision to fund projects is typically done on a project-by-project basis, and those decisions may be done based on the expected return from competing projects. That calls for a different kind of management approach to make that kind of decision. You are much more likely to find an Agile project management role in companies in the second category. In the first category of companies that are more product-oriented than project-oriented, the role is probably closer to a product manager than it is to a project manager. The key difference is in what drives the business and how the company does financial management. The first role I want to talk about is the team-level Agile project management role. First, let's look at the team level in an Agile project. It's important to understand how project management is typically implemented in an Agile project at the team level. Officially, in an ideal world, there is no role for a project manager at the team level in an Agile environment. However, although there may be no one with the formal title of project manager, a number of project management functions are still needed. They are just distributed among the other roles in an Agile project. For example, the product owner has overall responsibility for the success of the project and for planning and prioritizing the features and capabilities that are required. That is somewhat similar to a project manager in a plan-driven project, but it is a very different role. The product owner is actually more similar to a product manager than a project manager. He or she is focused on the ultimate product or solution being successful from a business perspective and not just planning and managing project activities to meet defined requirements. The Scrum Master has responsibility for team leadership and facilitation and removing any impediments. That also has some similarity to a project manager role. However, a project manager would typically play a much more active role in planning and organizing the activities of the team, where a Scrum Master is often called a servant leader. His or her role is more of a facilitator to support the work of the team. Finally, the team is responsible for estimating, planning, and managing their tasks and responsibilities, and working collectively as a team to coordinate work within the team as necessary. Those are also tasks that might be done by a project manager in a traditional plan-driven project. As you can see, many of those functions would typically be performed by a project manager in a traditional plan-driven project environment, but they've been distributed among different roles in an Agile project at the team level rather than being done by one person with the title of project manager. That approach of distributing the project management functions among all the members of the team and making it an integral part of the way the team works is a great way to create a much more dynamic and adaptive project management approach. In a traditional plan-driven project, the project manager role can become a bottleneck and an obstacle to communications. As I've mentioned, in the real world, people who are in those roles are many times not well prepared to take on those project management functions, and they may need help in fulfilling those responsibilities. For example, in a project-oriented company, the product owner typically comes from a business role and may have little or no project management experience or product management experience. And he or she may also have other responsibilities that make it difficult to devote the time that is needed to the product owner role. The Scrum Master probably has Agile training, but may have little or no project management experience. And finally, the people on the team are primarily developers and testers and are not necessarily accustomed to taking project management responsibility for estimating, planning, and managing their own tasks. For that reason, some companies might combine a project management role with one of the other roles on the Agile team to help the team integrate the right level of project management into the Agile development approach. What I've seen most frequently is companies combine the Scrum Master and Project Manager role. That is probably the easiest combination to make, but in that case, the Project Manager should play more of a facilitative role rather than a directive leadership role. Alternatively, the Project Manager role could be combined with the Product Owner role, but that requires a considerable amount of business decision-making and business domain knowledge that a Project Manager may not have. In any case, it's important that the project manager play more of a consultative, coaching, and supporting role rather than the more traditional directive management role that a project manager might play in a traditional plan-driven project. Here's an example of a team-level Agile project management role. It is based on a real experience I had with a company that I will call Company X. Of course, I have disguised the name of the company, but it is a real-world situation. Here's some background. Company X attempted to replace a very large and complex legacy application with a new application that was to be developed with their own internal IT resources. To give you an idea of how large and complex this application was, it was essentially a highly customized, homegrown customer relationship management or CRM system that provided the primary business application for the entire company. Very few companies would take on a development effort of that scope using their own internal resources, but there was a spirit of optimism that it could be done with an Agile development approach, even though the company had only a limited amount of experience in developing large, complex applications and no prior experience with Agile. A development team was formed to do the project using an Agile development approach based generally on Scrum with a single Agile team. 2 years into the project, it became apparent that the project was in trouble. At that point, the project had no end in sight, and senior management had lost confidence that the project would ever be successful. I was brought in as an Agile project manager to help get the project on the right track. I saw my goal as an Agile project manager to put in place the right people, process, and tools to get the project on the right track, and if I did it successfully, I expected to work myself out of a job and transition the role I was playing to someone else. This is a perfect example of a situation where there's a need to blend some amount of plan-driven project management with an Agile development approach. The company had started the project with a very limited amount of upfront planning. If there had been a bit more upfront planning to better understand the scope and complexity of the project, they would have likely discovered that the project was just much too large to be completed by a single Agile team in any reasonable amount of time. I was in this role for about a year. I helped identify a number of areas that needed to be addressed to get the project on the right track, and then transitioned the project management role to another project manager who took over the remaining execution of the project. I think this is a good example of the role of an Agile project manager at the team level. What I did in this situation was to put in place the right people, process, and tools to get the project on the right track, and then step out of the way as much as possible and intervene only as necessary where I could provide value. Doing that may seem counterintuitive to many project managers who are used to taking a very active role to drive results. When I'm asked what I did to make a project successful, it sounds ironic to say I did as little as possible, but that's what needs to be done in many cases. The role of an Agile project manager in this situation is actually somewhat of an Agile coach, but it's a different kind of Agile coach. Normally, an Agile coach works inside the team, coaching the team as a whole and individual team members on how to execute an Agile process effectively. Most Agile coaches come at this from a pure Agile background without a focus on project management. This illustrates how someone who has some strong project management skills, as well as strong Agile skills, can provide a different kind of coaching to get a project like this on the right track by blending together the right level of traditional project management discipline with Agile in the right proportions. This project really needed to be managed at multiple levels because of the scope and complexity of the project. It's ironic that if you do this job well, you can actually put yourself out of a job, but that's the right thing to do. I was in this role for about a year. Towards the end of that year, I had cut down my involvement in the project to a part-time role as the project got stabilized on the right track. I then hired a new project manager to replace myself. The next role I want to talk about is an Agile project management role in a hybrid Agile project. First, let's clarify what we mean by a hybrid Agile approach. A hybrid Agile approach is a project where there is a need to blend some level of plan-driven project management with a more adaptive Agile development approach. Some people in the Agile community believe that it's inappropriate to impose any kind of control on an Agile project, and there's a binary all-or-nothing choice between a totally adaptive Agile approach and a totally planned and rigidly controlled waterfall approach. I don't believe that to be the case. The truth is that I don't think anyone gets a blank check to do an Agile project without any expectations of what the end result of the project will be and what the cost and schedule for completing the project might be. So there's always a need to set and manage the expectations of the client that the project is designed to satisfy. Here's what a hybrid approach would look like that blends an Agile development approach with a plan-driven shell based on traditional project management principles and practices. This would let you blend some level of predictability and control with any Agile project. I originally developed this framework when I was managing a large fixed-price government contract for the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration. We had a contract with the FAA that was a fixed-price contract. The contract specified some high-level project deliverables, as well as some cost and schedule milestones that we had to meet. That formed what I call the macro-level envelope that the project had to operate in. However, there was a sufficient level of slack built into that outer envelope that allowed making detailed decisions about project requirements at what I call the micro level. Here's a summary of how it works. The macro-level framework is a plan-driven approach designed to provide a sufficient level of control and predictability for the overall project. It defines the outer envelope, the scope and high-level requirements that the project operates within. Within that outer envelope, the micro-level framework uses a more flexible and iterative approach based on an Agile Scrum methodology that is designed to be more adaptive to user needs. If there's a sufficient level of slack in the outer envelope, minor changes can be absorbed in the micro layer without impacting the overall cost and schedule milestones for the project at the macro layer. Naturally, however, if there's a big enough change in the micro layer, it would need to trigger a change in the costs and schedules of the project at the macro layer. This model can be very flexible and adaptable. For example, the macro layer can be as thick or thin as you want it to be. In one situation, you can have a fairly thick and well-defined macro layer that defines requirements in a greater level of detail and allows for less flexibility in the micro layer. In another situation, you can have a fairly thin and loosely defined macro layer that is limited to high-level project requirements or objectives and relies much more heavily on defining detailed requirements in the micro layer as shown here. This is a very general model and can be applied to almost any project. Here's an example of an Agile project management role in a hybrid Agile project from my book. General Dynamics UK Limited is a leading prime contractor and complex systems integrator working in partnership with government, military and civil forces, and private companies throughout the world. Due to the nature of the government contracting environment that General Dynamics UK has to operate in, projects have to work within two key constraints of time and cost, where other Agile methods don't always have those constraints. This case study illustrates how a company can successfully develop a hybrid Agile approach that blends together elements of a plan-driven approach for managing time and cost constraints and still providing flexibility to their customers. The project used the DSDM, or Dynamic Systems Development Method framework, which is a hybrid project-level Agile framework used primarily outside of the U.S. to successfully deliver the Combat Identification Server, or CIDS, technology demonstration project for the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom. The objective of the project was to help clear the fog of war by providing a picture of the position of nearby friendly forces on the ground in the cockpit of an aircraft. This diagram shows a high-level summary of how the DSDM framework is structured. In the traditional approach to project management shown in the left-hand diagram, the feature content of the solution is fixed, while time and cost are subject to variation. If the project goes off track, more resources are often added, or the delivery date is extended. However, adding resources to a late project often just makes it later. And a missed deadline can be disastrous from a business perspective and could easily damage credibility. Quality is also often a casualty and also becomes a variable, accompanied by late delivery and increased cost. DSDM A-Turn's approach to project management shown in the right-hand diagram fixes time, cost, and quality at the foundation phase, while contingency is managed by varying the features to be delivered. As and when contingency is required, lower priority features are dropped or deferred with the agreement of all stakeholders in accordance with Moscow rules. Moscow is an acronym for a requirements prioritization approach that we will discuss later. The acronym stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. The project was very successful and the collaborative approach was a big win. In the U.S., the Defense Department is now mandating Agile for many contracts. However, in most cases, it naturally needs to be a hybrid approach to combine some level of traditional plan-driven project management to meet cost and schedule constraints with an Agile development approach. This effort shows how it's possible to blend a traditional plan-driven project management approach with a more Agile development approach. However, it could not have been done without a spirit of trust and partnership between the client and the solution provider. There is a much more significant role for an Agile project manager at an enterprise level for a number of reasons that we will discuss. Here's a summary of the key differences that you are likely to find at an enterprise level. First, the projects are likely to be much larger and more complex. Second, there is also typically a significant need for integration with other related projects and programs and other enterprise-level software applications. And third, scaling Agile to an enterprise level can also represent a significant challenge for integrating the efforts of multiple teams and integrating the work of the teams with other functions outside of the team, such as DevOps. And finally, there is also a need to integrate projects and programs with higher levels of management, such as product or project portfolio management, as well as the company's overall business management strategy. All of these things are challenges that create a much more significant need for an Agile project manager at the enterprise level. The role of an Agile project manager at the team level is challenging enough and requires learning how to blend Agile and traditional plan-driven project management principles and practices in the right proportions to fit a project. However, as you get into larger and more complex enterprise-level projects, it becomes a lot more complicated. It is well known that an Agile project management approach won't work well unless it is well aligned with the overall strategy of the organization that it is part of. That is particularly true of large, complex, enterprise-level projects. Here's an example of an enterprise-level Agile project management role taken from a case study in my book, The Project Manager's Guide to Mastering Agile. Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, or HPHC, is a full-service health benefits company serving members throughout Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and beyond. For over 40 years, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare has built a reputation for exceptional clinical quality, preventive care, disease management, and member satisfaction, and has consistently rated among the top health plans in the country. This was a very important factor because it meant that the implementation of this project could not be allowed to cause any problems that might impact Harvard Pilgrim's excellent reputation and standing. This project involved replacement of most of Harvard Pilgrim's legacy systems, which were seriously outdated and limited the company's growth. This slide shows how significant a change it was to move from Harvard Pilgrim's legacy systems to a more modern and more flexible service-oriented architecture. Implementation of this plan required HPHC to totally revamp its internal systems infrastructure to move from a legacy big-box hardware-software environment that was no longer supportable to a totally new service-oriented architecture. It's important to note that this effort involved the replacement of the majority of the company's most business-critical software applications. This project was very successful and involved almost completely replacing most of Harvard Pilgrim's legacy systems over a 5-year period and required about 100 Agile teams. There were a lot of moving parts in that effort that all needed to be very carefully planned and coordinated to avoid disrupting the company's business. It is very easy to see why some level of project and program management combined with an Agile development effort was essential to the success of this effort. The project used an approach based on a combination of an Agile development approach with higher-level project and program management. It was further complicated by the fact that a large percentage of the development effort was outsourced to another company, and that required an additional level of coordination. There is definitely a need for strong project and program management in a large, complex enterprise-level development effort like this. However, whoever plays that overall program or project management role needs to thoroughly understand Agile principles and practices to integrate the development team efforts into the overall project program portfolio management approach. It also calls for a style of leadership that is consistent with an Agile approach. The final role I want to talk about is taking a more adaptive approach for non-Agile projects. Finally, even if you are never involved in a true Agile project or a hybrid Agile project, there are many ways to use Agile concepts to improve the effectiveness of traditional plan-driven projects. Here are a few examples that can go a long way to improve any project without necessarily fully adopting an Agile approach. First is developing a more collaborative approach with the business users. Agile teaches you the importance of developing a collaborative approach based on trust and partnership, which can be used to some extent in any project. And second is putting more emphasis on maximizing business value. An Agile project manager needs to learn to put more emphasis on business results as opposed to a traditional emphasis on managing costs and schedules of a project. And third is taking a more iterative approach. It's generally very easy to break up any project into iterations to develop functionality incrementally, and that can be a big improvement in any project. And finally, reducing unnecessary documentation and overhead. Reducing unnecessary documentation and overhead is another improvement that can go a long way toward improving the efficiency of any project. The key point is that learning Agile principles and practices will make you a much stronger project manager even if you are never involved in a pure Agile project, because it will expand your repertoire of skills to apply to any given project. And instead of force-fitting a project to a single approach, you will be able to develop a much more adaptive project management approach to fit the approach to the project. Here's a quick summary of some of the key points we've discussed in this module regarding Agile project management career paths. First, the role of an Agile project manager can be very different from a traditional project management role and present some significant new challenges for project managers. At a team level in a pure Agile project, many project management functions have been distributed among the Agile team members, and you won't typically find someone at the team level with the title of project manager. However, that is somewhat of an idealistic model, and in the real world, many Agile team members need help in assuming those project management functions. In those situations, a project manager can provide value to help the team become more self-sufficient. There's a much more significant need for an Agile project manager in a hybrid Agile project or an enterprise-level project. In a hybrid Agile project, the project manager needs to know how to blend Agile and traditional plan-driven project management principles and practices in the right proportions to fit the project. At an enterprise level, the role of the project manager can become much more significant in larger and more complex projects, and in many cases, it is actually more of a program management role. Finally, even if you're never involved in a true Agile project, learning these skills will make you a much stronger project manager by taking a more adaptive approach to any project. In the next section of this course, we're going to start a new module on requirements for PMI ACP certification, as well as an overview of the PMI ACP exam and the domains of knowledge required for the exam.